An analyst appeared on ESPN and openly questioned whether Alex Eala even deserved to be mentioned among the sport's rising names. It was the kind of comment that could shake a young athlete, dismissive, public, and impossible to ignore. But what happened next didn't just answer that doubt, it erased it completely. The very next morning, under the blazing lights of Hard Rock Stadium, Alex walked onto the court with something to prove. Not through words, not through emotion, but through her game. Point by point, rally by rally, she dismantled every ounce of skepticism. By the time she walked off that court, the conversation had changed completely. The same voices that questioned her place were now forced to witness it. But this isn't just a tennis story. It's something deeper. It's about belief, sacrifice, and a young girl carrying the weight of a nation that doesn't often see itself in the global tennis spotlight. To really understand the magnitude of what happened at the 2025 Miami Open, you have to go back not just to the start of a match, but to the beginning of a dream that many people thought was too big for where she came from. Alexandra Eala was born in Manila, Philippines, a country where tennis isn't the sport kids grow up idolizing. The streets echo with basketball games, boxing champions are national heroes. Tennis, that belonged to other nations, other systems, other opportunities, but the Eala family saw something different. They didn't see limitations, they saw potential. And they made a decision that would change everything. In 2018, at just 12 years old, Alex left home, not for a short training camp, not for a tournament, but for a completely new life. She traveled halfway across the world to Manila, Spain, to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy, one of the most elite and demanding tennis academies on the planet. Imagine that for a moment. A 12-year-old girl leaving her country, her comfort, her family, chasing a dream in a place where nothing felt familiar. New language, new culture, new expectations, and no guarantees. Most people at that age are still figuring out what they want to be. She had already committed to becoming something extraordinary. Day after day, she trained among some of the best young talents in the world. She learned discipline. She learned resilience. She learned how to lose and, more importantly, how to come back stronger. Because at that level, talent alone isn't enough. You either evolve or you disappear. There were moments of doubt. There always are losses that sting. Loneliness that creeps in. Questions about whether the sacrifice is worth it. But Alex kept going because she wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was carrying a dream that started in Manila. A dream that people said didn't belong on tennis' biggest stages. And years later on that court in Miami, when the world was watching and the critics had already spoken, she didn't just respond. She delivered a statement. One that echoed far beyond the stadium. One that made an entire nation stop, watch, and believe. And if you stayed until the very end of that moment, you didn't just witness a win. You witnessed history being written. Think about that for a moment. 12 years old, a completely new country. A language she didn't grow up speaking. A level of competition so intense it humbles even the most gifted players. While most kids her age were worried about school assignments or what to do after class, Alex Eala was learning how to survive and compete against the best young tennis players in the world. And somehow she didn't just survive, she thrived. Years of sacrifice, discipline, and quiet resilience began to take shape. Then came 2022, the moment that made the tennis world finally stop and look her way. At just 16 years old, Alex Eala captured the U.S. Open Junior Championship title, one of the most prestigious prizes in junior tennis. It wasn't just a win, it was a statement. A signal that this girl from the Philippines wasn't just participating anymore, she was arriving. Suddenly people started paying attention. But attention in tennis can be fleeting. For every rising star, there are dozens trying to break through. And when the draw for the 2025 Miami Open was announced, Alex Eala's name wasn't exactly circled by analysts or highlighted by headlines. In fact, she was barely part of the conversation. She entered the tournament as a wild card, a spot not earned through ranking but granted by organizers, a gesture of belief, a recognition of potential, maybe even a gamble. At the time, she was ranked 137th in the world, and in a tournament like the Miami Open, that number matters. This isn't just any event, it's a WTA 1000, one of the most competitive stages in women's tennis outside of the Grand Slams. The draw is stacked. Every round feels like a final. Elite seeds, experienced veterans, battle-tested competitors, they're all there fighting for every inch of the court. This is where reputations are built and where dreams often end. So for a wild card ranked outside the top 100 to make a serious run, it wouldn't just be difficult. It would be almost unthinkable. Because to do that, she wouldn't just have to play well. She would have to defeat players who had spent years at the highest level. Players with more experience, more power, and more recognition. Players who weren't supposed to lose to her. And yet, that's exactly the path that was waiting, not just one upset, To make a real run here, it would take something far more demanding, multiple back-to-back victories against elite players performing at the very highest level. The kind of run that doesn't just surprise people, it forces them to rethink everything they assumed. And at first, it didn't look like that kind of story. It started quietly. Her opening matches at the 2025 Miami Open barely made headlines. No big features, no dramatic buildup, just another wild card grinding through the early rounds. She won, then she won again. At the ESPN desk, there was little reaction. Because this is how these stories usually go, right? A promising young player strings together a couple of wins, gives the crowd something to cheer for, and then reality steps in. The run ends. The spotlight moves on, that's the script, but Alex Eala wasn't following a script. Then came the real test. Across the net stood Jelena Ostapenko, the 2017 French Open champion, a player known for her explosive, no-holds-barred style. Her forehand, a weapon, her mindset relentless. She doesn't ease into matches, she overwhelms them. Ostapenko had been here before. She had faced the biggest names, defeated champions, thrived under pressure. On paper, this wasn't supposed to be close. A teenager from Manila ranked outside the top 100 wasn't meant to trouble someone like her, but something was changing, because Alex wasn't playing like a wild card anymore. She was playing like she belonged. And then came the moment that shifted everything. March 26, 2025, Hard Rock Stadium, Miami, Florida. The stage got bigger, the lights got brighter, and the opponent, on one side of the net stood Iga Świątek, world number 2, a 5-time Grand Slam champion, the most dominant force in women's tennis over the past several years, a player whose presence alone can rattle even seasoned competitors. She had already lifted the Miami Open trophy in 2022. She came into this quarterfinal in control, having dropped just one set the entire tournament. Sharp, focused, in rhythm, this was her territory, and now, standing across from her was Alex Eala, the same player some had questioned even belonged in the conversation. It was supposed to be a formality, it wasn't supposed to be a fight. But what happened next? No one was ready for it. She was focused. By every metric that matters, ranking, titles, experience, Iga Świątek was the overwhelming favorite. This was her stage, her level, her moment to control. And on the other side, Alex Eala, 19 years old, ranked 137 in the world. A wild card entry into the 2025 Miami Open. A player many had spent the last 2 years politely doubting, was acknowledged but not fully believed in, encouraged but not truly feared. But from the very first game, something felt different. There was no hesitation, no sign of intimidation. Eala stepped onto that court like she had nothing to lose and everything to prove. She broke Świątek's serve, then she did it again. And again, this wasn't a fluke. This wasn't nerves from the favorite. This was pressure, sustained, relentless, unexpected pressure coming from a player no one had prepared for like this. Świątek, known for her suffocating baseline consistency and ability to control rallies, couldn't settle. Her rhythm, usually so precise, so dependable, just wasn't there. And Eala wasn't giving her time to find it. She was playing flat, aggressive, fearless tennis. The kind of tennis that doesn't ask questions, it forces answers, and suddenly the match wasn't following any familiar pattern, it was slipping. And then it was over. The moment Eala struck that final point, something bigger than just a match result exploded across the internet. Because here's what the internet does better than almost anything else: it remembers. Within hours, clips began resurfacing. Analysts questioning her consistency, pundits downplaying her ranking, conversations where her name came up only to be followed by hesitation, doubt, or dismissal. Filipino fans had seen it all before. They had heard every "she's not ready, let's wait and see," every subtle way of saying she didn't quite belong yet. And now they had proof, receipts, every overlooked performance, every minimized achievement, every moment where belief lagged behind reality. It all came flooding back into the spotlight, because this wasn't just an upset anymore, this was a response. A loud, undeniable response. And it didn't just echo through that stadium in Miami. It traveled across the world, all the way back to the Philippines, where an entire nation was watching, feeling, and finally being heard. The reaction was overwhelming and completely earned. Within hours, the narrative flipped. Filipino hashtags surged across the globe. Under clips from ESPN, the tone shifted from quiet skepticism to loud, unified recognition. What had once been a slow trickle of support turned into a wave. Fans demanding that the world finally acknowledge what they had been seeing for years. Because for them, this wasn't sudden, this wasn't shocking, this was overdue. What made the backlash towards certain analysts sharper wasn't just that they doubted Alex Eala. Underdogs are doubted all the time, that's part of sports. It was how they did it. The ranking 137 had been used like a verdict, a shortcut to dismiss her. As if a number could fully define a player's level, her growth, her momentum. As if what she was actually doing on the court mattered less than where her name sat on a list. And that's where the irony hit hardest. Because that same number, the one used to question her legitimacy, became part of the story that made her victory unforgettable. It wasn't just that she won. It was who she beat while carrying that number. Names like Iga Świątek don't lose easily. They don't get outplayed by accident. And yet, on that court at the 2025 Miami Open, the gap that ranking was supposed to represent simply didn't exist. Voices like Greg Rusedski, who had previously framed the conversation with caution and doubt, now found themselves part of a narrative that had moved beyond them. Because by 2026, the conversation around Alex Eala isn't the same anymore. And it shouldn't be. The facts have changed. The results are undeniable. The resume is growing. But here's the part that matters most. She hasn't changed. She's still the same girl from Manila. Still the same 12-year-old who left home with a dream and a backpack to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy. Still the same player who steps onto the court with quiet focus, whether she's facing an unknown opponent or a Grand Slam champion. No shortcuts, no entitlement, no noise, just work, just belief, just tennis. And that's what makes her story different, because this was never about proving people wrong. It was about proving over and over again that she belonged all along. With the same preparation, the same discipline, the same hunger, that never changed. What changed was the world finally choosing to see it. Because even as her breakthrough moment echoed across the sport, the journey didn't suddenly become easy. The 2026 season reminded everyone, including her, how unforgiving tennis can be. Rankings fluctuate, momentum shifts. One week you're rising, the next you're defending points under the relentless math of the WTA system. There were tough losses, matches where things didn't click, opponents who exposed gaps like Karolina Muchova, who stopped her run in the round of 16 at the 2026 Miami Open. That loss pushed her ranking back toward the mid-40s, a reminder that progress in the sport is rarely a straight line. But none of that erased what she had already done. Because when Alex Eala defeated Iga Świątek in Miami, it wasn't just about reaching a semifinal. It was history. She became the first player from the Philippines ever to reach the semifinals of a WTA 1000 event like the Miami Open. Let that sink in. In a country of more than 100 million people, no one had ever gone that far in women's professional tennis at that level. That's not just a stat you read and move on from. That's a barrier being broken. That's a door opening for the first time, and you could see the weight of that moment on her. Not as pressure that crushed her, but as something she carried with purpose. Every time she walked onto the court in Miami, it meant more. Every point wasn't just about winning or losing, it was about representation, about possibility. About showing an entire nation and maybe even a region that this path exists. You could see it in her eyes, the focus was there, the composure was there, but underneath it there was something deeper, an awareness that she wasn't just writing her own story anymore. She was writing a chapter for millions of people who had never seen themselves on that stage before, and she carried that with remarkable grace. "My season has come to an end," she wrote, closing the chapter on a year that changed everything. "I have no words to describe what 2025 has brought me. My dreams have come true. Everything that has happened this season is a love letter to my family, my team, and to little Alex." Little Alex, the 12-year-old who left home for Spain. The kid who sat with homesickness but refused to let it win. The same girl who walked into the Rafa Nadal Academy with nothing but belief and walked out years later ready to face the world. The girl who became a junior Grand Slam champion. The girl who arrived in Miami as a wild card and left as something much bigger. Because what people still get wrong about Alex Eala is this: that week wasn't luck, it wasn't timing, and it definitely wasn't a fluke. It was the visible result of something invisible, years of work that nobody was watching. Early mornings on empty courts, repetition without applause, losses that didn't make headlines but left marks, grinding through smaller tournaments, fighting for points, learning lessons the hard way, the kind of development that doesn't trend but builds champions. Even the ranking that critics leaned on, that 137, was never a final judgment. It was a snapshot, a temporary number attached to a player who was still evolving, still climbing, still becoming. And the moment the world froze that number and used it to define her was the exact moment she outgrew it, because she never stopped moving. By 2026, that movement had turned into something undeniable. She climbed to a career-high ranking of world number 29, not as a surprise, not as an exception, but as confirmation. Confirmation that Miami wasn't an outlier, it was a preview, a glimpse of what happens when preparation meets belief at exactly the right moment. And maybe the most powerful part of her story isn't just that she proved people wrong. It's that she never needed them to believe in the first place. By 2026, everything had changed, not just for Alex Eala but for how the tennis world talked about her. She wasn't a question mark anymore, she was seated at WTA.